Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Wayne.
And I'm Anodea Judith. Welcome.
Anodea is calling from the Garden of Eden. Yeah. So welcome to everyone. I'm so glad all of you can come from, as it looks like, all over the world, or mainly perhaps the US and Australia and New Zealand, where time is the morning. So this is the webinar that's called Investing in and Creating Our Future, Innovating New Ways for Thriving. And it's kind of, it's part of a series Anodea and I are doing. We'll do more, but called Visioneering the Future. We did a webinar in March called Visioneering the Future. And we plotted this out a few months ago, not knowing, we didn't have our crystal ball to know about the coronavirus at that time, but it seems like now more than ever, the ideas we'll be talking about are very pertinent and relevant. So Anodea, do you want to say any introductory comments before?
Yeah, well, hi and welcome everyone to this call. I think that the topic is so up in the world right now, and we are in such a beautiful place to reconsider everything that we're doing and how we're doing it on this planet. So, you know, the main thing, I think we should look at this disruption in our business as usual as an evolutionary, that disruption is necessary in order to create a new system, or in order to help the system move to a new and higher level. So while we're in this disruption is a great time to consider new possible ways of living, whether it's in democracy or economics or education or healthcare. And Michael and I have been talking about these things and have decided to drill deeper in some of the topics. And today's topic is economics, which is really underpinning everything. So we look forward to looking at what's wrong with our current system, but that's, you know, easy. And then daydreaming, or, you know, scheming and dreaming and visioneering possible alternative scenarios and where we could go from here.
Yeah, absolutely, Anodea. You said it well. And really, yeah, that's why I would call it Visioneering the Future, and for this, economics. So I'll get started with my introductory comments. Then I'll have you do whatever more you want to say, and then I'll begin the slide presentation, which will be about 20 minutes. So I want to start with a quote, and the quote comes from over 100 years ago from former President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt said, "There can be no real political democracy without something approaching economic democracy." And so for all of us who believe in the potentials of democracy, we think of political democracy, but not so much underpinning it is economic democracy. And perhaps we'll be able to shine more light on that as we go along here. And at the root of our predicament as humans is the foundational and systemic flaws of our economic system. And there are many flaws there. But imagine living in a society where you can focus on what is most important to you, where you can focus on what gives you meaning and purpose, where the planet is protected and the sacredness of the human experience is cherished. Yet if we don't reform our economic system, then no matter how much personal work we do and how much we dream of a sacred planet, we'll be stuck in a broken society, and living in a broken society leads to unhappy, unfulfilled people. So that's what I was getting at. No matter how much personal work we do, if the foundation is broken, it makes it hard to heal as a human being. And instead, we really need to visioneer a society in which we all can thrive in a more collaborative way. And so in a time of great disruption, such as what we are going through right now, what I've called the unbearable lightness of a paradigm shift, we can create a new society, a new economy based on collaboration, creativity, imagination, innovation, thrivability, love, compassion, sustainability, and regeneration. And to get there, we need to move away from scarcity thinking and move towards abundance thinking. And in my slide presentation, I'll explain a little more how that applies to economics. So that's my introductory comments. I'll turn it over to you, Anodea.
Yeah, I mean, I've even been hearing the phrase a lot, a post-scarcity economy. And, you know, right now we are going through a period where there's a lot of people out of work and long food lines and cars lining up to get, you know, for people trying to get into unemployment. And we are in a scarcity, we're in the outcome of a scarcity modality. Somebody I've been looking at lately is Peter Diamandis, who is talking about how we're going into a period of abundance as we have more automated jobs that actually lift people from the burden of work, and we can produce more, that it's actually going to produce a whole up-leveling of society in the long run. But we're going through this kind of contraction in the birth process that will then at some point let go as we get birthed into another order.
Yeah, and that's, I think, you know, we all can feel it, and any of us who are spiritual minded and are conscious evolution minded know that there's something shaking out. And so we're ready. Okay, so I'm going to begin my slide presentation. And just for logistic purposes, there's a Q&A button that you have, the chat button, and raise hand. So when I finish my slide presentation, if anyone has any sort of comments, because I may inspire you to think a lot on this, you know, we'll open it up. And so I'm going to hope the technology gods are on my side. And here we go. So I read you that quote. Here it is. There can be no real political democracy unless there is something approaching economic democracy. Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, in his time as president of the United States, was known as a trust buster who really made sure that economic democracy flourished by busting up large monopolies. So when we think of the term economics, oftentimes you get a little glassy-eyed and slack-jawed, and you just kind of check out because it just seems like it's a dismal science, as it's called. And there are terms that just like go over your head, you know, macroeconomics, devaluation, valorization, GDP, gross domestic product, microeconomics, inflation, dumping, and so on, currency, liquidity, and so on. And it's just, you know, there's a reason that it is a dismal science, to keep people away from thinking about it. Interestingly enough, the origin of the word economics comes from the Greek word oikonomia, which comprises two words, oikos, the household, and nomoi, laws, rules, constraints. And so the original meaning of economy literally means something like the laws of running or managing a household. So back the origin of the word, the laws of running or managing a household, there was a lot of value in the household. You know, not only just managing your finances, but, you know, making food, taking care of yourself. If you had family living with you, or you had children, significant other, you know, creating art, reading, playing, all the things that have value, but in our economic world, current world, has no value. Instead, economics currently is all about GDP, growth, and that's all that's valued, growth. And so the ironic thing is, if you stay at home, like we're all doing right now, and even in just other times, you stay at home and decide, oh, I'm going to cook home tonight, whether by myself, friends, family, children, and afterwards we'll play a game, we'll go take a walk. That's bad for the GDP. You're not spending your money in the economy. And it's just a very twisted way of doing things. And so this current iteration of our economic realm is what's called neoliberalism. It's been around about 40 years, but even longer in the 20th century. And neoliberalism is all about letting the free markets reign and profits before everything else. And the downside is it leads to wealth inequality, income inequality, massive student debt, for-profit healthcare system. They're talking about in the US, a lot of this is in the US, though other countries have it to some degree, climate change, which affects the world, racial disparities, and ultimately the high levels of stress and anxiety. In terms of the GDP, stress and anxiety is good because, you know, for a lot of people, they'll take medication for it, and that drives up drug company profits, which drives up the GDP. But we're seeing the problems now. They've really, warts and all, have come to the surface in this current pandemic. And this was an article in the New York Times not too long ago called "Straggling in a Good Economy and Now Struggling in a Crisis." And it just talked about the coronavirus pandemic has shown how close to the edge many Americans were living, with pay and benefits eroding even as corporate profits surged. This picture was taken just a week or two ago. Cars lined up in Texas, San Antonio, Texas, at a food distribution center, miles and miles of cars, people who are hurting, financially hurting. And so we could say coronavirus capitalism has exposed the deep-rooted weaknesses and structural flaws of the economic system. But good news is there is a better way. So I'm going to show you a video. I have a couple of videos during this presentation. And let's see, somehow the chat box. Okay, this video is a woman named Stephanie Kelton. Stephanie is an economist, a professor. Also, she was an advisor to Bernie Sanders' campaign. And she, in this 3-minute video, it's an interview, and this was filmed about a year ago, so it's not necessarily about the coronavirus, but the ideas are relevant to our times. And in it, she paints a picture of a society and world, what could be, in a very positive way.
You have to help people see the world as it could be, relative to the way it is today. Right. You know, look at our communities. The idea that there's not enough work that needs to be done, everything from preparing for a Green New Deal, shoring up our coastal regions, preparing for wildfires and floods, and you know, urban communities that are blighted, schoolyards that are. Show people what we're tolerating today, and then fold the page over and show them what it could be.
So it's the classic on the house renovation shows. It's the classic before and after.
That's exactly how I would do it.
That's how you pitch.
I would do it exactly.
What does
like
before look like at the moment? I think we know. I think we're good because we can see all the social problems out there, and also the fact that Wall Street has devoured Main Street in this country. From what I can see, what does the new vision look like?
It's a vision of people who are living in an economy that has broadly shared prosperity, where it's working for everyone and not just a handful of people at the very top. So in the richest country in the world, why do we have, you know, millions of kids living in poverty? Why do we have people in elder care facilities lying in a bed in a dark room alone, when we could have somebody sitting there holding their hand, playing checkers, reading to them? We can invest in so many ways in this economy. And I think it's just as simple as showing people the small changes that can have meaningful, impactful.
And is it that simple? Because when you talk about neoliberalism being the philosophy that drove Reagan right the way through till now, which has left us with this absolute train wreck of an economy, won't people say to you, well, okay, it's great, Stephanie, you showed me a before and after, and yes, of these old people, you know, there's a lot of cynicism around this. But I say, what's the philosophy here? What are we doing here? Why are we doing this? What's driving your economics? Because what happens very quickly is the socialism word. Oh, that's just socialism.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm prepared to say that what we've done is collectively across the world, we have obsessed with budget outcomes. And that has been the driver of public policy. Where is the budget outcome? Is it in deficit? Is it in a big deficit? Is it in a little deficit? Can we put it in a smaller deficit? We have to reorient our focus and get back toward human outcomes, those are the outcomes that matter. It isn't the budget outcome we should be obsessing over. It's, do we have a broadly balanced economy? And what does that look like? I'm done balancing the budget. Nobody needs to obsess about governments balancing their budgets. This is not a hallmark of success. The hallmark of success is, show me a balanced economy. Are people broadly sharing in the prosperity? Is all of the income and wealth going to people at the very top and everybody else is falling farther and farther behind? That is not a measure of success, and those policymakers should not be championing their success in shrinking the budget deficit while they've wrecked their economies in the process. You're forcing your economy to balance the budget instead of using your budget to deliver a broadly prosperous economy.
Okay. We're gonna hear a few more things, or read a few more things about Stephanie Kelton. So she was getting at some very specific points, and I'm going to drill into it more. Now, Stephanie Kelton, a few years ago, she wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, how we think about the deficit is mostly wrong. And so this is at the heart of her thinking and ideas, and she's not the only one who proposes these ideas. And in June, Stephanie Kelton has a book coming out, The Deficit Myth, Modern Monetary Theory and the Birth of the People's Economy. So the ideas that Stephanie proposes, and they're not pie in the sky ideas, really creates a people's economy. And about the deficit myth, this is a blurb from the book, it says, Vice President Cheney famously boasted, Reagan proved deficits don't matter. He was wrong. Deficits matter, but not the way we've been taught to believe. We've been told that China's our banker, Social Security and Medicare are pushing into crisis. We could add all the congressional stimulus is also, that's going on for the coronavirus. Some will say, oh, that's pushing us into crisis too. We're told the US could end up like Greece and that deficits will burden future generations. These are all myths. Deficits can be used for good or evil. They can enrich a small segment of the population, driving income and wealth equality to new heights while leaving millions behind. That's what we see in the current economic structure. They can fund unjust wars, destabilize the world, and cost millions their lives, or, and this is the area I outlined, they can be used to sustain life and build a more just economy that works for the many and not just the few. I'll be going into that in just a little bit, a few minutes. So, and this was an op-ed in yesterday's New York Times from Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winning economist. And he wrote, peacocks and vultures are circling the deficit. And I circled the tagline, the subtitle, the only fiscal thing to fear is deficit fear itself. And so he's also saying the same thing Stephanie Kelton is, deficit fear is a fear. And the article goes on from there. But the question always is, and what you hear, all these big ideas is, well, how are you going to pay for it? Mr. Monopoly wants to know. When you pass go, you might get $200, but that won't pay for it all. And you might end up having to go to jail, or if you think you're going to get boardwalk. But really, that's the wrong question. So when Bernie Sanders was running for president, he had big ideas. Him and Elizabeth Warren proposed really big ideas. Medicare-for-All. You heard a lot about Medicare-for-All, and that was the tagline. That was the cost for a year, $3.2 trillion. Green New Deal, $1 trillion. Affordable housing, free universal childcare, cancel student debt, free college, public school reform, Social Security expansion, and they put in how they would pay for it, each one, a wealth tax, patient premiums, corporate taxes, business and wealth taxes for Green New Deal, cancel student debt, financial transaction tax. So they tried to show you how they were going to pay for it, but that wasn't really fully necessary. Just someone writing in. Okay, Joseph Oljak has a question, but we'll get to that in a little bit because I want to just go on with the slideshow. Stephanie Kelton, in a recent op-ed in March, as the Congress was pushing their stimulus package that they eventually passed, the $2 trillion stimulus package, Stephanie Kelton's question, oh, how will you pay for it? That question was thrown in the trash. All of a sudden, it didn't matter. And as Stephanie Kelton says, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to now show you another video. Let's get there. Here we go. Okay, this was also in March. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, after Congress passed the stimulus bill. This is what she had to say.
Progressive moment, because what is shown is that all of these issues have never been about how are you going to pay for it. It's never been about whether we have the capacity to do these things or if the logistics have worked out. All of these excuses that we have been given as to why we cannot treat people humanely have suddenly gone up in smoke. And what has been revealed is that all of these issues were really about a lack of political will.
Yes, lack of political will. Really is the only thing that's stopping these ideas from going forward. So Stephanie Kelton again wrote an op-ed in March, right before Congress passed the stimulus bill, in which she said, just use the computer, in quotes, at the Fed to give people more money. That Congress has all the firepower it needs. It just needs to send spending instructions to the Federal Reserve, as it always does. So what does she mean, just use the computer? So let me show you another short video. This video comes from, this video was a segment on 60 Minutes, the CBS TV show 60 Minutes, and it was from 2009, and it was an interview with Ben Bernanke, who at that time was the chairman of, the head of the Federal Reserve. And he was asked, how did you give that money to the, talking about the bank bailout of 2008, 2009. And he was asked, how did you do it?
Is that tax money that the Fed is spending?
It's not tax money. The banks have accounts with the Fed, much the same way that you have an account in a commercial bank. So to lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account that they have with the Fed. So it's much more akin, although not exactly the same, but it's much more akin to printing money than it is to borrowing.
Oh, printing money. So that's what Stephanie Kelton meant by using the computer at the Fed. As Ben Bernanke said, that's like printing money. So the Federal Reserve, we all hear about the Federal Reserve. You hear about it a lot these days. And 10 years ago, you heard about it a lot. Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States. It's not owned by anyone. Federal Reserve was created in 1913 by the Federal Reserve Act to serve as the nation's central bank. Most nations that have their own cash flow, their own sovereign money, have a central bank. Europe has a European central bank for all the European countries of the European Union. The Board of Governors in DC is an agency of the federal government and reports to and is directly accountable to Congress. The Federal Reserve is made up of 12 member banks. There's a New York Fed, a San Francisco Fed, there's a Fed in Chicago and St. Louis, and different, they have all parts of the country covered. And all banks, every bank has an account at the Federal Reserve. So does the Federal Reserve print money? How it prints money is to understand how the Fed prints money, remember most of the money in use today is in cash. It's credit that's added to bank deposits. It's similar to the kind of credit you receive when your employer deposits your paycheck directly into your bank account. So when people say the Federal Reserve prints money, they mean it's adding credit to its member bank accounts. So you're hearing, oh, the Federal Reserve's putting out $2 trillion into the economy. It's just moving electronically. So the more we understand about this economic situation and how easily it is that money is conjured up out of thin air, you may see things a little differently. Well, Henry Ford did. Henry Ford, the industrialist, the wealthy industrialist who founded Ford Motors, said it's well enough that people of the nation don't understand the banking and monetary system, because if they did, I believe there'd be a revolution before tomorrow morning. And I'm not advocating getting your pitchforks out or having a revolution in the way Henry Ford is insinuating, but it's just once we understand that all this money the Fed is printing up, so-called printing up, just moving electronically, is going to not the people's economy, but for the banks. So this is the path, though, towards visioneering and creating a green economy, a life economy. And the steps are not that complicated, and they're right in front of us. And this is it, how to create the life economy. I'm talking about the United States, but it can be in any country. And this is what would happen. You create a national investment bank is created. The bank sells bonds to the public, to corporation. Anyone can buy the bond, but the Federal Reserve will actually buy the bonds. And the Federal Reserve will just move money through the computer to buy the bonds. And the National Investment Bank would then fund the Green New Deal, Medicare-for-All, cancel student debts, make college free, have free universal daycare, etc. Or the federal government can deficit spend to pay for all of these right here, as Stephanie Kelton put it, the deficit myth, or Paul Krugman said, fear of deficit. And the Federal Reserve can buy the government's debts, just like the Federal Reserve is buying the bank's debts. They can buy the government's debts, or they can buy the bonds that the National Investment Bank has. And a few years ago, a study was done that found that the world economy could reap $26 trillion in a decade by fighting climate change, and all the ways through guaranteed jobs, just having renewables be the main type of energy. This is the Green New Deal. This is why they called it, using Franklin Roosevelt's term, the New Deal from the 1930, updated for the 21st century. Make it green. You'd stimulate the economy. You'd make lives better for everybody in so many tangible and intangible ways. And the chances of something like another coronavirus pandemic would lessen, because we're not destroying the ecology to make viruses more prevalent. And not only can we change the economy in a big scale, but even personal lives would change in this same philosophy. For instance, the 9-to-5 workday isn't just hated, it's obsolete. In that we could end wage labor bullshit jobs and allow people to thrive by doing work that's a full expression of who they are and not have to worry about how they will make a living. How do we do this? How do we create a society where all can thrive? Two ways, or a couple of ways. One is helicopter drops, which was the economist Milton Friedman's term for one-time payment from government to the people, which is what's going on in the United States. Other countries are doing a much better job. The United States can't even figure out how to get money to everybody all at once. But the better way is the term that's been on a lot of people's minds, a lot of people talking about it more and more and more, universal basic income. And this can happen. It can be paid either by the government through deficit spending, then the debt is bought by the Federal Reserve, or by allowing individuals to have bank accounts at the Federal Reserve called a Fed account. Then the Federal Reserve just moves the money into people's accounts. And there are people proposing this. There's an organization, the Great Democracy Initiative, that has proposed central banking for all, a public option for bank accounts. And they say it's time to end the special privilege of only banks having bank accounts at the central bank, the Federal Reserve. We propose giving the general public the option to have a bank account at the Federal Reserve. We call it a Fed account. So not, a totally different way of doing things, and it can be done. All it takes, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, the political will. Now, 2 years or so ago, there was a book written called Doughnut Economics by a British economist, Kate Raworth, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And the gist of her book is creating a world where an economy and a world where everybody thrives and prospers. And she used the donut as the model. And so the donut has, on the outer rim is the ecological ceiling. On the inside, the squishy part of the donut is the safe and just space for humanity, a regenerative distributive economy. And then on the inner circle of the donut is the social foundation. So what this means is we create a society where we don't overshoot the ecological ceiling. And so by doing that, we have regulations to watch that companies, corporations don't rape and pillage the earth. And we have a social foundation that people don't fall in the donut hole. So we have a strong social safety net to watch for people. And then everybody thrives and prospers. So we get away from GDP, it's all about growth. And instead we change that model to one where everybody thrives. And the good news is that the city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands is embracing the donut model to mend their post-coronavirus economy. And it says Dutch officials and the British economist, Kate Raworth, the author of Donut Economics, are using that model as a guide to help city of Amsterdam thrive and balance with the planet. So if Amsterdam is the first to do it, more will do it. And it makes so much sense in our society now. And so let's start innovating a new society and world, not be scared about the end of the world as we know it, capitalism, but excited to build what comes next. So that's our purpose, to visioneer what we can create. And that is the end of my slideshow. And a lot of people sending in chats. And what I just did in 20 minutes is probably a full day seminar. So I hope I didn't go too fast to get it for you. So let's see. Anodea, should we delve into these chats?
Sure, there's been comments, and I've been writing back to a few people.
Yeah.
One of them, the Malthusian, Joseph speaks of the Malthusian Dilemma, and at the core of many of our ecological crises is overpopulation. We have too many people living at a high standard of living, using and buying and, extracting more things from the earth. I don't know, we have to control population or we're going to get viruses that bring us death. It's just as simple as that, viruses or wars or whatever, or more climate change. But it's interesting, in the Renaissance, when they had the plague, a lot of people died off. And because there weren't as many people there was such a demand for labor that laborers could demand a higher wage for themselves because there was a scarcity in the labor force because there were fewer people. And that drove up a whole renaissance, economic renaissance during that time.
Yeah. Robin brings up a good point. She said, Michael Moore is the executive producer of a new film, Planet of the Humans. I watched it. And she said he makes the film, for those who haven't seen it, it's free on YouTube for the next few weeks, Planet of the Humans. And he said it makes the Green New Deal look like an absolute horror show, a hopeless failure. I think I watched the video today with the producer, director, and Michael Moore talking about the film, and they said really what they were trying to point out is that a true movement is from the bottom up, and that when you start getting the financial class getting involved in renewables, all they're trying to do is take money, extract money into their pockets. And I think they really shined a light on it. I think we could do a Green New Deal in the proper way when we create a people's economy in the steps I laid out. So Robin, let's keep the hope that it won't become an absolute horror show. I mean, they talked about that, in the film, that we have to learn to do less or stop over consuming on the planet. And I think this sabbatical we're all on, this reprieve, is showing how the planet can bounce back so quickly, it can regenerate. And Jeff wrote Political Will is the Entire Story, that and Social Solidarity around a movement and narrative vision. But if you ask for a raise, it's no surprise they're going to give none away. Pink Floyd, True of Us, until the political will is there. There are lots of good visions, but not so much in the way of political will. It's in upheaval, there is a chance to build political will around a vision, but factualizing a movement is general. Let's overcome that and keep building both vision and political will. UBI cannot green the world when the biggest corporation is now poised to control more of the economy than before the crisis. Political will, yes, Raworth's models are something I followed for some time. I'm glad you followed her models. I think universal basic income of and by itself can be such a game changer, because getting people off of that hamster wheel where they can start thinking about what's most important in this world. A lot of people have become complacent or too busy trying to make ends meet. Universal basic income won't replace people's incomes, but it gives people a better start. And right, Jeff, you know, there's so much that needs to be restructured. And we're just going at the beginning of it. But this, what I laid out, is really the beginning of the way. And Joseph asked, can we Green New Deal ourselves out of this problem of energy? I think, you know, that's why the last show, let's innovate the path forward. And that's why I said, like, UBI, universal basic income, can really be such a game changer, because more people will start being able to visioneer, innovate, and have less stress of, where am I going to make my next dollar? How am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay everything when I have a cushion like that? So I think, you know, there's a lot that we need to innovate. There's a lot more to go, but I think for those of us who understand it, we can change the story. The name of the film is Planet of the Humans. Anodea, should we keep going, because you have some things to talk about?
Yeah, well, we might get more discussion after I speak.
Yeah, this is great.
Sure. Yeah. So thank you all for your questions, and thank you, Michael. That's a great slideshow and a great summation. And I have not prepared slides because I'm talking a little more theoretically maybe about where we're going. We don't have slides for that yet. But even before we go into the future, to a little bit larger picture on the past, not just the recent, but humanity has been in a place, I call it our childhood, from our infancy in, you know, the arms of the mother in nature, and then growing into our first civilizations, and all through that into our, what I call now, our adolescence. And just like a child is growing their body and they're getting larger and larger until they reach adolescence where their growth stops, we have had a growth-based economy that has been built on goods and infrastructure. In other words, building buildings and selling apples and making cars and making computers, and it's all been goods-based, because that is what we, and growth-based. So this unending growth, which is what it seems like when you're an adolescent. Oh my God, they're growing so fast. And then when you reach adolescence, the growth stops. So we are at our adolescent stage of civilization and undergoing what I call the initiation into the next era, which is our planetary adulthood. But that initiation is a contraction in that to get us to move away from the growth economy. And you started your slideshow with showing that unending growth of GDP is not sustainable on a planet of finite resources. Now, creativity may be infinite, time may be infinite, but the resources of this planet are not infinite, and they cannot support an endlessly growing population. So the population, and there's been a lot of comments about that in the chat box, the population also has to stop growing and become sustainable. So that is taking us to a new form of exchange. And if we are moving from a goods-based economy, which I say we've fulfilled at this point, we have enough hospitals, we have enough airports, we have the roads, the railroads, the stores, the infrastructure, we have probably too much of that. And now we, you know, what sustains our economy then? We don't need to buy more stuff. We're drowning in stuff. We, you know, the thrift stores are drowning in stuff. And think of all the stuff in department stores and the car lots just sitting there, more stuff for us to have polluting the earth, is to shift to a different principle upon which our economy is based. And that is a principle of giving. What do we contribute? What do we give to each other, to better the world, to, toward evolution, toward creativity, really toward the bettering of ourselves and each other? And it is, found that humans actually, we have two impulses. One is our selfish impulse, I need to take care of my own in order to survive. And the other impulse is more altruistic, to give to others and to share and to make others happy. And people who have done fundraising for, trying to get people to donate to causes and things like that say that, when people do, their hearts really blossom, that there is a natural, joyful impulse into the heart when we contribute to others. Well, how do we make that work economically? Now, we've talked about a lot of things like, universal basic income. That is one where people are given some money and they don't have to commute and drive as much, and they don't have to pollute as much. And what people actually do when they have time, which I think a lot of people are doing in this shutdown, is they're improving their home, their neighborhood, they're making things for people. They have time freed up to go into a more creative direction. One thing that I have thought about in this service-based, or what I call a generocracy, in how we can reward generosity, is we can have a kind of social app that you'd have on your phone, so that, if my next door neighbor brings me a pie, or babysits my kids, or mows my lawn, or drives my mother-in-law to the doctor, then I would go in this app, find her name, give her a point or a couple points or whatever. And, that we get rewarded for what we do. This can be a kind of alternative currency. And then when people have a lot of points, they can be cashed in for goods. I'm calling them Benny points because they've given benefit to someone and they can actually use their points for benefit. I mean, this is just one way. The devil's in the details, but what it does is it inspires people to say, oh, wow, I need some points to go to this restaurant. I need to, what have I done for anyone lately? Maybe I can do a favor. And these small things that we might not have time to do when we're in a 9-to-5 work day, we are actually inspired to do. Myself, there's an empty lot downtown that I think would make a great community garden. If I had a universal basic income, or I had this, I would say, I'll take my time to create a community garden for the people. People are then inspired to give more. So I think as we move into an economy where we have more jobs that are becoming eliminated by technology, things we don't need to do, this issue of people only being able to be playing in the current economy if they work is going to become an issue of the past. We're going to have more and more people out of work, so work cannot be the basis. And when we back off from that, we actually become much more ecological. And I think this time of the coronavirus, when we're sheltering in, is cleaning up the air and cleaning the waters, and we're all seeing this ecological aspect. We just need to learn how to make that work economically. And the collapse where people are hungry, and there's 26 million that have applied for unemployment insurance, and all of that is so bringing the current system to a halt, where in a sense, money will start to become, I can't say meaningless because that'll take a while, but people that can't pay rent, well, they have to, everyone's giving away things for free on the internet. We're giving free classes, we're giving free this. There's more and more stuff. Wikipedia, things like that we're starting to take advantage are given for free. And then money becomes a little more meaningless. There's an episode of Star Trek that stands in my mind where someone was cryogenically frozen from our era. and then wakes up on the ship, and 200 or 300 years later, whatever it is, and when he realizes what happened, he says, oh, wow, you know, I had an investment in the stock market. It must be worth a fortune by now, having stayed in all this time. And the people on Star Trek kind of laughed and said, you know, we don't use that system anymore. We don't have money. That's not how we do things. And that may seem like a preposterous dream, and we're certainly not going to get there tomorrow, but we're getting there faster than we might imagine possible, as it just, you know, people, you know, even giving people universal health care and giving them a paycheck, that we are getting out of that economic system that really was supposed to be a meritocracy, but through, you know, interest and debt and investments and all that, got a way to reward people for taking and for keeping rather than for being in circulation. And so if we look at money as currency or as circulation, and we look at the collective as a body of people, a body of a nation, a body of a world, then that circulation needs to go through the whole body. If it's concentrated in one place alone, well, medically we call that an aneurysm. It's usually something that's about to burst. And then the feet don't get any circulation, or the hands don't get any circulation. So it's something that gets way out of balance. We can only thrive as, you know, a nation, as a world, as a planetary civilization, when the currency is distributed to all. But at the same time, we have to change the value system so that when people are rewarded with a currency like universal basic income, or that they can get something for free, that doesn't turn into just going out and spending money on more stuff. There was a comment earlier that just puts money back into the hands of the corporations that make the stuff. That is not our purpose here, to acquire more stuff, but to free ourselves up from stuff, to live well, to thrive, to go into our spirituality, to evolve ourselves. And there's one more thing I want to say about various eras in history, is that the major changes to a new level came when there was a kind of prosperity that occurred for that time. So when we went from hunter-gathering to the first, large-scale farming, where we could create enough food for a lot of people, that was when we went into division of labor. So now not everybody had to hunt and gather. A few could, do the food. There was still some hunting, but, that people could farm. That enabled us to stay in civilizations, stay put, build buildings, have a division of labor. That was a big shift. Now with technology, we have a kind of abundance that is freeing up time that we used to, do in menial labor. And that is freeing us up to, take seminars like this, to study, to meditate, to do yoga, to, evolve ourselves. We couldn't do that in an earlier economy. There just wasn't the free time. And today in this economy, though we might look at the scarcity, people live better than the kings and queens of old. And we have to appreciate the abundance that we have. This is not a scarcity. And even the bum on the street can get wine that, it was a better vintage than some of the kings and queens had, who had to sleep with their servants in their room, sitting up in bed because of the heater and the smoke would get into their lungs. I mean, we have an abundance, and I think this becomes a new platform for us to shoot into a new organic evolving system. And we're going to watch a lot of that happen. How soon it takes to get there and whether I'll see the fullness of it in my lifetime, I don't know, but we're watching, the playing field get just plowed up, and that creates fertile ground for something new to be born.
Yeah, well, thank you, Anodea. It really comes down to, and I love you bringing up Star Trek. It has such a true post-scarcity economic view, in the Star Trek economy. And so really we have to move forward towards abundance, and get away from the scarcity mentality. So as I mentioned in my slideshow, at my introductory comments before the slideshow, that slideshow really was about a real different mindset in how we finance our society and the things we desire. Anodea, you showed me a website earlier today, the Evonomics.
Yeah, like you just replaced the C with a V. Evonomics.
Yeah, so evolutionary economics, and I think these ideas that we're talking about really fit into that. And there's a lot of economists who are bringing up these things of doing it a new way, but it will take a certain level of consciousness, evolved consciousness, to move this forward. We're not going to sit around and hope it's going to happen. That just doesn't work. And so it's really moving forward. We've had a lot, while you were talking today, I was trying to keep up with the people chatting. I couldn't keep up with everyone. I'm sorry if I didn't answer. But we're talking about some big ideas. And Jan Phillips, at the last one, she wrote how we get the word out about this possibility. We need to speak. We need to get on the mountaintops and start screaming. That's why I said my 20-minute presentations were really like a full day. I mentioned Stephanie Kelton, the economist. She's has her book coming out in June. It's on this idea of modern monetary theory. They call it MMT. And you know, when you get past the jargon, you can understand it. I hope most of you understood what I was getting at. It's a total different way. We're not talking about, I mean, if you look up Stephanie Kelton, watch some videos on YouTube, she'll talk about taxation is not necessary for deficit spending, but she said there's a need for taxation because, one, if you're going to put more money into the economy, like printing more money, moving more economy, you have to extract money. And so you want to extract money. And then also she talked about we can't have the massive wealth inequality that we have in this country. We need to have a more redistributive economy by having a wealth tax, all these various taxes. So it's not so much how are you going to pay for it by having wealth taxes or financial transaction tax. It's more to make this more equitable society. And I think, you know, some of the questions that came in are in this realm. How do we make this a more equitable society? And I think we're getting there. For some of us, maybe not as fast as we'd like to see, but it's up to us, all of us, to go forward with this. And Anodea brought up a lot of good points too about a new economic system going forward. And the social scientist Jeremy Rifkin, a few years, wrote a book called The Zero Marginal Cost Society. And in that book, he used the term that this post-capitalist society is moving towards the collaborative commons, where things are much more, as you were talking about, Anodea, more an open culture. Ideas get spread, kind of wikinomics, and things are free, and people find a new way of doing things. And that's where everything has come to a head with this coronavirus. It's it's a blessing in certain ways, not the kind of blessing we'd like to have in this harsh way, but it's really showing the light, showing a path forward. Not the virus itself, but it's exposed the holes in our society for all to see, for once and for all.
Well, I'd like to address one of the questions I see coming in on the chat box from Trudy. You're doing a great job of explaining an ideal future. How would you address the challenge of transforming the traditional values of approximately 50% of the US population to a Green New Deal, and doing so in time to save the planet? And in time to save the planet is a big one, because we don't have a lot of time. I think that the way we transform, and then there's a comment underneath about Buckminster Fuller, and he actually said that, is to create something better and to do it in small pockets and demonstrate. The country of Costa Rica, for example, got rid of its military some years back, a couple decades back or whatever, and then they become a test case for what can happen when you take the money normally spent in military and you put it into your schools and you put it into your infrastructure. We can find, countries like Iceland that, got rid of their corrupt banking industry and their corrupt politicians. They're a small enough country that they could have an uprising and then their economy was doing better. We have a Bank of North Dakota, which is a state-owned people's bank. You were talking about people's banking earlier, Michael, that was more solvent than any other state in the US because they had a different kind of banking system. So these small pockets actually demonstrate possibilities. Most people have to see something working before they can believe in it. And, the analogy that I'm so fond of is the way the caterpillar turns into a butterfly. And that is, and I even talk about this coronavirus shutdown as our chrysalis moment, where we're all cocooning in our homes. But in that, the caterpillar is constricted. It can't go out and consume anymore. And a caterpillar consumes 27,000 times its weight in its lifetime. It can eat a whole tree in your backyard. It can't consume anymore. And in the chrysalis, imaginal cells begin to appear, what biologists actually call imaginal discs. They're cells that are different than the caterpillar body. And at first, the caterpillar's immune system attacks them, much as people attack new ideas in science, in medicine, in spirituality, in politics. New ideas are attacked by the status quo. But these imaginal cells keep appearing in the caterpillar body. And as they do, they connect with each other. There's these organizer cells that appear and start organizing them, and they start to become the body of the butterfly. And at that point, they are too numerous and for the caterpillar's immune system to attack them. And it becomes a nutritious soup that the butterfly fills up the wings. And then and only then, the chrysalis becomes transparent and the butterfly can come out and fly. So that tells me it's not about killing the caterpillar. It's not about attacking the caterpillar. It's about creating a better idea, a better mousetrap, and trying it out in small populations. And then those small populations can connect with other small populations. Communities can connect with other communities. There's a man whose name escapes me at the moment, David, I'll have to look it up, but he is creating what he's calling cool blocks. And he's
David Gershon.
Yes, yes, thank you, Gershon. And cool blocks are blocks of neighborhoods where people have decided to pool their resources or pool some resources in order to lower their carbon imprint, maybe do solar microgrids, various things that are more ecological. And then he wants to make from those cool blocks, cool cities. And he's sent in like 200 blocks in Palo Alto, California, and he wants to have, cool cities. And it gives this idea of something we can be, but you start in small ways and demonstrate that it works. And then people look at it and say, oh, I want what he's having. That looks good over there. And people will then and then there comes a point where it hits critical mass and it just goes.
Yeah, that's great. And I was I don't mean to change the subject, but you talked about the imaginal cells, and in my film On the Path to Strawberry Fields, you talked about it. And there was another thing you said that I thought of it. You said in my film, you said we need to have more women in politics. And so I was thinking of that one, because we're talking about banking. You talked about the North Dakota Bank. In Iceland, when Iceland had all the bank failures in 2008, they had the first financial collapse. All the banks failed, except for the women-owned banks in Iceland. Those banks did fine. And then also, I read an article in The Guardian, the British newspaper recently, talking about the country, a lot of the countries that are doing well with the coronavirus, handling it well, are countries that are run by women. They talk about New Zealand, Iceland, Finland, Denmark. So I think that's another part of it is, yeah. we have someone from New Zealand, if she's still on the call. So that's another important thing to add to it. So there's a lot of ways out of this going forward. And Anodea, when we discussed doing this series, it was called Visioneer the Future, and as I said at the very beginning, that was the name of the initial webinar in March, and now we're breaking it down, going kind of following a sequential order. This one was about economics. Next time, and we're talking about doing democracy next time. But really, the aim is, where we go with this is kind of organic. You and I will be talking about where we go with this overall, the big picture. But really, it was about, my vision was getting people start visioneering the future, creating this new future, because we're all in this together, and it's going to be the collaborative commons that's going to save us. Whether it's women in politics, the imaginal cells leading the way, creating the people's economy, true democracy, all these things. But it's all, there's nothing that stops us from what we can do, making the impossible possible. So, so we've given a path forward just with economics. And as I said at the very beginning, economics really is the foundation of everything, and that helps you understand why Teddy Roosevelt's saying over 100 years ago that you can't have political democracy without something approaching economic democracy. So yeah, Patricia, please send Jacinda. I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but yes. And someone wrote imaginal women. Joseph, yeah, that's they. Yeah.
But to imaginal cell, we have to imagine. We have to be using our faculties of imagination to imagine something better. Society is falling in the hole from lack of imagination. It was even said in Proverbs, I think, that without a vision, the people perish. So we need a vision of where we're going. And I think we're in a collapse cycle of history. And that collapse is, leveling the playing field, plowing it up so that something new can be born. But we're in that collapse phase, and it's very hard to go through.
Yeah.
Suffering and loss and crisis and things like that.
Yeah, and that's where I used the term at the very beginning, the unbearable lightness of a paradigm shift, of the paradigm shift we're going through. Chaos theory tells us that on the other side of chaos is a new order, and that's what we're all, that's what we want to see. And we've all had that dream for quite a while. This is the time.
I'd like to address another question that came up quickly. I know we're coming to the end, but it was like, well, this is fine and dandy. I can't find it now, but this is fine and dandy, but do we have time? With climate change hanging over us like a lead balloon about to fall on us, do we have time? Is this way of, creating a better mousetrap and, a way of transformation fast enough? But I think something the coronavirus has shown us is how rapidly we can change when we really need to. I mean, who would have thought that within a period of a few short months, weeks even, we could virtually shut down the whole world to reduce its transportation, its consumption, its pollution to the degree we have in such a short time. I mean, the intelligence of the virus, I know there's been immense suffering, but to make that happen, humans would not have believed that we could have changed that quickly. And yet this virus, I think, is an evolutionary catalyst to get us to move in the direction that we didn't have the political will to move in before. It is doing it for us. And I think, when people talk about ending the lockdown and getting back to business as normal, I don't think that's the point. I think the point of this virus is that we look at a different way of doing things. And that is what we're trying to do in these seminars.
Mm-hmm. And I saw talk about going back to the normal. There was a image of a protester on Earth Day in Warsaw. I think it was Warsaw, and the sign said, "Normal was the crisis." And so it's and you're so correct, Anodea, how quickly over this last month, 6 weeks or so, things have changed, and it just shows you change can happen. Sometimes change happens in quantum leaps very rapidly. So yeah, we know, anyone, you know, concerned about climate change knows there's only, the window of opportunity is narrowing, and the time to act is now. So I say the time is now.
Yeah. And I think the coronavirus, I think I said this in a blog I wrote today, but is showing us, you know, what's normal on the earth. What's abnormal is to be running around like crazy. What's abnormal is to be using the resources of the earth to our own extinction. You know, what's abnormal is to be commuting 1 or 2 hours every day back and forth in a car. That this might be showing us this is more normal for the earth. This is a more normal pace. So, you know, when we say what's normal, you know, we're not, evolution doesn't go backward. Nature doesn't go backward. And we may, you know, revert some to what we've been doing, but I think that the longer this goes on, the more we are implementing new tools. A lot of the new telecommuting tools that are being implemented now, people are not going to go back to commuting like they were, not everyone. So I think there will be some permanent changes from this, and you know, other things will happen again. So I think it's happening faster than we could imagine.
Oh,
Over time, I noticed. So
yeah.
These have been great comments.
Yeah, we may have to do, I was bringing it up to you, Anodea, of doing just instead of a webinar one time, just a discussion where we could really just spend a lot of time talking. So we'll, as you and I plot this out, we'll see what, if we go in that direction at least once.
Yeah, and then we could actually let people speak. I guess nobody raised their hand to actually speak, but that is a possibility. But people can, you know, come on screen and share their ideas and have some collaborative comments.
Yeah, and Patricia, glad we got you fired up to get back to grassroots. Change happens mainly from the bottom up. So we're all ready. And we want to change this into, you know, as Stephanie Kelton's book calls it, a people's economy. So that's, you know, that's really important. So, yeah, should we wrap it up? We got more?
I think so, yeah.
Coming in.
Yes, I thank everybody for your comments, your participation, for coming to listen to this. We don't have the answers. I don't think, Michael, either you and I said, you know, we've got the whole way figured out. We're just tracking some of the evolutionary edge of people's thinking, taking us in a new direction. And the more we share these ideas, the more they mature. Yeah, and one of the things we've talked about, Anodea, for the future is doing either a Visioneer Academy or a Visioneering laboratory where we can really get people together, whether it be virtual or live or some combination, to really start airing out the ideas to and making action plans to go forward and doing some really great stuff, because, you know, the limits of the imagination are not there, are unlimited, I should say. So thank you, everybody. We're getting wonderful thank yous in the chat. Thank you, Michael. And
yeah,
we'll
thank you.
get in touch with you all through our email list about future events. Okay. Yeah, and we'll be sending the recording out. Okay. Okay. Peace, everyone. Blessings. Bye. Blessings. Bye.